So they took the step, while in conflict with Rome, of actively transmitting Iranian religious ideas into the Roman world in a kind of a spiritual or psychosocial guerrilla warfare.
Test the claim.
Michael! Yeah, so I mentioned the tradition of the handshake, and I've heard some scholars mention that.
How are you?
I'm very well, thank you very much.
The protest was anti-Islam.
Which protest?
The one they done. It's not anti-immigration. Do you know why? The only thing they did is attacking Muslims, Muslim shops and mosques.
Okay. Oh, I see.
It's clear.
He's recording there. Yeah.
Oh,
You can come in.
That's all right.
No, you can come in.
That's all right. Yeah, so I've read some work that suggests that the ritual that is so.
Anyways, what I would say, that's terrorism and extremism. It's not thugs. They're not thugs. Terrorists, extremists.
Okay, I understand. So in the West we have it's kind of a global thing now, but I think historically it was associated with the West, the gentlemanly handshake. But it's been brought to my attention that, and I think we see this particularly in imagery of secret societies, where they have developed like elaborate handshakes to signal to other members that they are members.
Who they are?
Yeah. What their rank? What
yes.
rank? They have.
Rank or just just by certain. It just shows another person that you're also a member. So some people have argued that the handshake appeared in Western society as a result of it being a part of the practices of certain mystery religions, specifically the cult of Mithras, which was an incredibly popular religion in the Roman world. And a number of prominent figures in Roman society. It was considered the cult or the religion of the elites of Roman society, both like the military elites and so on, and the elite families. So I mentioned somewhat more controversially, perhaps, that there may even be a sign of the presence of this divinity in some of the practices in the Islamic world. So Mithras, let me tell you a bit more about Mithras and what he was considered the divinity of. So he was a divinity that was associated with the sun, not the sun itself, but something that came in advance of the sun. Let me give you another example, like the handshake. I mentioned that Mithraism, or the cult of Mithras, was the religion of the military elites. So keep that in your mind. One of the rites that one had to perform in the ascension through the grades. So there were different grades of initiation in this secret society or in this mystery cult. And it was called the rite of the solar charioteer. And they would invoke an image of Mithras traveling across the sky in his golden chariot, which would emit rays of sunshine. And one, to perform this rite or this ritual, one would shield his eyes from the radiant glory that would emanate from his chariot. And how would he do that? He would shield his eyes. And it's argued that this became the military salute that we see everywhere, all around the world. So you're probably now you want to hear where I see. Oh, I'm still describing the associations of Mithras, what he's thought to govern. So Mithras is ultimately an Indo-Iranian divinity. So very, very, very ancient. And he is thought to govern contracts, agreements, covenants, and oaths. And don't forget also, how do we seal agreements? With a handshake. Now, there is an aspect. No. I want exclusive content today. Thank you. I appreciate that. I don't usually do that. There is an aspect of the Islamic marriage ritual which invokes a contract governing the dowry. So some describe it as a gift from the husband to the wife, or from the groom to the bride. Now I'm going to tell you Mithras' name in the Iranian language, and there are two. One is a very direct transliteration is Mitra. So Mithras is Mitra in the Iranian world, but it has another name. So Mithras is quite a complicated figure in that it's not clear whether it's a male divinity or female divinity. It's considered somewhat androgynous. So whenever you see it depicted visually, as they often did in the Roman world, it looks like a young man, but somewhat effeminate. So it's hard to tell. Like, it's dressed like it's probably male, but from the features, it's hard to be comprehensive on that. So Mitra is largely considered a woman's name in the Iranian world. But then there is a version of the name which can be used as a prefix or a suffix for the names of both men and women. And it is Meher. So Mitra is also Meh. And this is also, you hear the name in various festivals that we have, like Mehragan. We have a festival towards the end of the year, coincidentally or not, at pretty much the same time as Christmas. And it's considered the birth time of Mitra, because remember, Mitra or Mithras is associated with the sun. And the birthday is said to be at the winter solstice, which is the longest night of the year. And it is the birth of Mitra because it is from that point on that the days become longer. And so it's considered the birth of the sun, so to speak. And it goes on for 40 days and nights. It is called Shabe Chele, the night of the 20. The Aramaic, I think the name for it that came from the Aramaic is Shabe Yalda, which means the rebirth in the Semitic, in Aramaic. So we have Mehr. In the Islamic marriage protocols, this gifting of the dowry, please correct me if I'm wrong, is mahar. I've done a little bit of research into the origins of that word, and it's kind of indicated to me that the root of the Arabic is found in the Akkadian language. The Akkadian language having been spoken in ancient antiquity, however, also used, for example, by the Persians when they conquered Babylon. It was still in use then. It was used in royal decrees. Now, where it enters the Akkadian, we don't know. I would speculate that it was transmitted into Akkadian from the Iranian language through the contact between the Persians and the Neo-Babylonians, for example. There is an opportunity there for that transmission. So I see the word meh very similar to mahar, I see that this particular ritual or practice governs a contract or an agreement between the husband and the bride, between the groom and the bride, which very much echoes the association of Mitra or Mithras as the one who governs or mediates contracts, agreements, covenants, and oaths. So, I'd like to get your thoughts on that. I've done quite a lot of talking.
Well, no, that's quite interesting. And the question would be, which is very difficult to understand really, is whether or not mahar is actually the same word as meher.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we're not sure if that is the
No.
case.
I'm definitely not sure.
If we was to build an argument on that premise, we're building an argument on something that we're not quite sure where these words come from.
Right.
But trying to understand the origins of practices is a very interesting story. And the more you know, the more it pushes you to find out more. But talking about the handshake, the handshake is not specifically mentioned as an Islamic duty.
No.
It's not specific. But it seems to be across global cultures today, for whatever reason, that in the Muslim world, there's handshake gesture. But it's very different to the handshake of the West. So the Arabs, they will handshake and kiss on the cheek, two sides, and give a hug.
Kind of blending their own practices, maybe with the handshake, which appears not to be sort of native to that culture, right?
Yeah. So the Arabs were more on a hug, a kiss on both sides of the cheeks. And that seems to have a very strong presence also in other cultures. The French do a kissing as well. The Germans do a kissing as well.
I'm not claiming that these gestures like the handshake, the salute, and so on are Iranian, by the way. I'm saying that in the Roman iteration, in the Roman branding of the cult of an Iranian god, they developed these rituals. But I don't think these rituals came from the Iranian world or came from the East. And it's interesting to understand how Mithraism came even to exist in the Roman world. Actually, this is an incredibly fascinating story. So the Romans were, from an Islamic perspective, you'll probably be very familiar with the conflicts between Rome and the Persians, because there are predictions made, there are prophecies made as you see it. The Persians, with whom Rome was at war during that time, was a dynasty called the Sasanians. But prior to the Sasanians, there was a dynasty, an Iranian dynasty, by the name of the Parthians. And they had been in power for, I think, something like 400 years, prior to their replacement as the ruling dynasty in Persia by the Sasanians. And the Parthians caused the Romans as many issues as the Sasanians did. However, they are one of the lesser known Iranian dynasties. They weren't Persian per se, but they were considered a northern Iranian tribe who found themselves as rulers of the empire. So they took the step, while in conflict with Rome, of actively transmitting Iranian religious ideas into the Roman world in a kind of a spiritual or psychosocial guerrilla warfare to attack the minds and the hearts of the Roman elites, not just with weapons but with ideology. They employed a mercenary navy, which became popularly known as the Cilician pirates. Cilicia being a port town in southern Anatolia, or southern modern-day Turkey. And they used the Cilician pirates, who actually became most famous for taking Julius Caesar hostage, and they won a significant ransom for him for his return. Ultimately, he had many of them killed, but they are famous for that. What the Parthians used them for was to transmit Iranian religious ideas, specifically those about Mithras, because the Parthians actually were Mithraists predominantly, not Zoroastrianism, not Zoroastrians as we consider the later Sasanians. The Sasanians established Zoroastrianism as the state religion, but the Parthians, by all accounts, were Mithraists. So they employed the Cilician pirates to transmit these religious ideas throughout the port towns of the Roman Mediterranean. And these port towns were the homes of many of the elite Roman families. And through tactics like this, Mithraism established itself as the religion or the cult of choice, or largely of the Roman elites and the elite military classes, the officer class, so to speak. Now, this, from my perspective, this seems like a serious problem for the Romans, because if the elite class of your society is worshipping the god of your enemy, or one of the gods of your enemy, that represents a serious national security risk, because it will breed sympathy for the enemy, because people will consider themselves spiritually akin to those with whom you're at war. And of course, this is even more problematic if it's your elite military class who are worshipping what was widely referred to as the Persian god, or a Persian god. At the time of the establishment of the Roman Catholic Church, bearing in mind Catholic only means universal, there was a choice to be made, I reckon, between Mithraism and Christianity. So it was either adopt the religion of the enemy as the state religion, arguably, or some iteration or some version of the enemy religion, or scour the empire for a religion that would lend itself to becoming the unifying religious tradition of the Roman Empire. And it turned out to be Christianity. And we're kind of told a story about the vision of Constantine. Constantine was at war, and there is a famous battle called the Battle of the Milvian Bridge on the outskirts of Rome,
Right.
where Constantine is said to have had a vision. I get confused. It's either a vision of a cross or a vision of the Chi-Rho, which is one of the Roman Catholic symbols of Christianity. And then he is said to have had a vision of Jesus basically instructing him to take on Christianity as his banner. The artifact in Rome that depicts the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, which I think is outside the Colosseum in Rome.
Yes, it is.
So it depicts the battle scene. Now, if the story we're told is that Constantine saw the vision of the Chi-Rho and had a vision from Jesus in a dream, if there is any religious symbology on the Arch of Constantine that depicts the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, you would expect that religious symbology to be Christian, right?
Which was not there.
And there is none.
Yeah.
But who do we see? We see Mithras.
Yeah.
We see Apollo, with
That's
whom
right.
Mithras is associated quite closely. And I believe there's a female figure. I don't remember who it is off the top of my head. First of all, the Arch of Constantine is quite a confusing construction design-wise, because it shows that it was kind of designed in various stages. But it's quite interesting that there are also what have been identified as Mithraic magi flanking the arch as well.
Yeah.
And they're identified, for example, by what they wear. They wear something called the Phrygian cap, which is a symbol very closely associated with Mithras and often thought to designate something of Iranian origin. In fact, the story of Mithras is quite fascinating in the sense that, who tells us the story of the visions by Constantine at the Battle of the Milvian Bridge and the dream vision is Eusebius.
Yes.
But I've come to understand that a first or an early draft of this story was discovered. The account of the Battle of the Milvian Bridge. And guess what's absent from that account? The vision of the Cairo.
Yeah.
There's no mention of it. So it seems like this narrative was worked into later versions of the story. I think what Constantine was doing was, like I say, finding a religion that he could adapt. And this was like the age of unification between church and state. This was like the fashion of the time. Because I'd say almost contemporaneously, the Persians did the same thing by establishing Zoroastrianism as their state religion. The idea of a state religion became popular in this era, in this epoch. But Mithras is everywhere without us realizing.
Yeah.
When Mithraism lost favor and was replaced arguably by Christianity as the candidate. In fact, I think Mithraism was outlawed to some extent, the same way Christianity had been previously. Like Julian the Apostate, for example. He apostated from Christianity, but actually he was reverting back to Mithraism. So you don't often hear that part of that story. Mithraism was already an underground cult. It was a mystery religion. It was not practiced in the open.
Exactly what I was thinking, yeah.
In fact, at some point, it was fighting for popularity with Christianity. And while Mithraism was the religion of the elite or the elite military classes, the common man of the Roman world was a Christian. Even within the military, the infantry would be Christians and the officers would be Mithraists, typically. Yeah. But they would often worship in the same locations. What we find is that the Mithraeum, the temple of Mithras, would be underground, and in some instances, churches dedicated to Jesus would be built on top. And there are some famous Mithraeum. Or Mithraea. The most famous in the UK is in central London, in the city of London. It's called the London Mithraeum.
Okay.
I think it's at London Wall. And I believe it was discovered in the 1960s, if I'm not mistaken, maybe a bit earlier than that. And it's obviously a Roman remains, and it has all the hallmarks that we associate with a temple of Mithras.
Yeah,
it's a subterranean, narrow channel with seating on the sides, and typically they would have a depiction of something called the tauroctony scene, which is basically the slaying of the bull by Mithras. And there's lots of symbology in this image. I read a paper just a few days ago associating the slaying of the bull by Mithras. So you see him literally riding the bull, and interestingly he's looking away and he's driving his dagger into the back of the bull. Well, where do we see bullfighting in the modern day, or bull slaying like this? We see it in the remnants of the Roman world.
Yeah.
We see it in Spain. We see
it outlawed now.
Pardon me?
It's become outlawed now.
It's faced a lot of backlash, understandably, in the last decade or so. But there are scholars who believe there is a clear relationship between the practice of bullfighting and the image of Mithras slaying the bull in the tauroctony scene, which was so famous, so well known in the Roman world. I'll give you another slightly more speculative example of Mithraism hidden in plain sight in the Western world. Sorry, excuse me. We've got a camera just here. Thank you. So as Mithraism lost popularity to Christianity in the Roman world, primarily as a result of Christianity being established as the state religion, the universal religion, Mithraism, which was already an underground mystery cult, was driven even more underground. It had to be hidden completely.
Yeah.
And many believe that the practices found their way into secret societies, like Freemasonry, for example. Now, I mentioned a couple of the rites of ascension, the rituals that had to be performed to ascend through the ranks of Mithraism. There were 7 ranks. One of them is called the Rite of the Nymphus, also known as the Rite of the Bridegroom. But the bridegroom in this sense is the groom who is also the bride.
Okay.
It's kind of interesting. So what this
I've heard that one before.
Yeah, so what this ritual would entail.
Oh, she's there. Oh my God. Someone just continued.
Yeah, but there's a lot of things you can say.
It's wonderful. I'm going to message them. Okay.
So the
This guy's gonna break your camera in.
Excuse me. Can I just ask you to give the camera a bit of space, please? Thank you. So the rite of the nymphus, or the bridegroom, required that the adherent. So the ritual would entail that the adherent seeking ascension in the ranks would act as the bridegroom.
Right.
So it would be a man, but he would be dressed in a bride's gown. Yeah. I don't know if it's because to ascend in this cult, one had to be open to being humiliated to a degree. But I guess they just lived in a different world at that time. They saw these things slightly differently. Maybe I'm viewing it with presentism, and I shouldn't. But so just have that image in your mind: a male dressed as a bride. Now let me take you to some of the symbols of Mithras. So I mentioned the Phrygian cap, but he's also depicted as wearing what's called a diadem, which is like a crown, a crescent diadem.
Okay.
And from the crescent diadem is emitted rays of light.
Okay.
The symbology gets a bit more controversial.
That's similar to the depiction where they have Jesus with a crown and light coming out of it. Is it similar to that?
I often think about the relationship between the imagery of the halo, or the origins of the halo imagery. Not necessarily with this reference, but maybe we can talk about that at some point. So now imagine a person wearing a crescent diadem with rays of the sun coming out. Now remember the scene I told you about Mithras slaying the bull?
Yeah.
So in that scene, Mithras is flanked by 2 like cherub-type figures holding torches. One of them holds a torch. So now,
Like the Statue of Liberty.
I didn't say it.
Oh, well, I say it.
Now the crescent diadem, the crown, the crescent crown, with the rays of the sun coming out. A figure dressed as a bride, holding a torch. Now, what if I said that figure is not a woman? It's not Lady Liberty. It's just an androgynous Mithras, who looks like it could be female or male. But there's more to it.
Right.
I mentioned that the cult of Mithras disappeared and diffused into secret societies that we know, like Freemasonry and so on. Well, the designer of the Statue of Liberty was a high-ranking Freemason, Bartholdi.
It's getting more and more interesting.
Designed the Statue of Liberty and placed it as a beacon of the Western world.
Up to this day.
It's still there. Obviously, it's taken on a different identity, perhaps a different meaning. It's thought of as something that represents liberty and freedom and so on. But actually, it may have much deeper significance than that.
Historical significances, yeah. And I think the occult world can recognize these symbols
Oh, yeah.
historically.
Yeah.